Welcome to the Stirring the Gumbo Pot podcast, the podcast for and about the history of Black people, the culture of Black people, and the accomplishments of Black people. This podcast aims to inspire, educate, empower, and celebrate the lives of Black folks. I would like to thank you for joining me on my very second episode of my new podcast. I am your host, the Cajun Peach, and welcome. I am going to dedicate this episode to my mother first and to Miss Toni Morrison. Rest in peace to you both. I decided to dedicate each episode I'm going to dedicate to someone, whomever I deem or choose to pay homage to. That's who I will dedicate my episode to on that particular day. This one first is my mother. I am going to dedicate this to her because rest in peace to my mother. My mother passed away December 2nd, 2020 from complications of COVID. And the reason I want to dedicate it to her because I think she's deserving of it. My mother was a hardworking single mother of 5 children, and she single-handedly raised us in the projects. And so I loved my mother, and my mother knew how much I wanted to do something in the media. She knew how hard I worked to be better and to be a better person and to accomplish something in my life. And so that's why I would like to dedicate this to her in her remembrance. And I love her so much, and I wish she could be here to hear my episodes and to see me try at least continue to try reaching my goal. So this episode here is dedicated to my mother first. The second person I would like to dedicate my show to is Miss Toni Morrison. Rest in peace. Now, many of you may know who Miss Toni Morrison is, but if you don't, I will give you a quick little history lesson on Miss Morrison. Toni Morrison, of course, is an African-American writer, author, and she was also an editor who worked at a publishing house up in New York City before she became a writer. She was born on February 18, 1931, and she was born and raised in Lorain, Ohio. She lived to be 88 years old, and she died on August 5th, 2019. And she was a pioneer, a jewel, a literary jewel, and an intellectual. She's an editor and author, as I mentioned, and she wrote several books that were published. One, she won the Pulitzer Prize in Literature. She also won the Nobel Prize in Literature. Her most successful book is Beloved, which was published in 1987. And she also wrote The Bluest Eye, which was her first published book, and the one who that book has been banned in so many different schools and libraries throughout the country since it was written because of its references to sexuality and sexual abuse and those type of subject matter. So her books, that's not her only book that's banned. She has several, including Beloved and Song of Solomon, who's also banned in libraries and schools throughout the country. Miss Morrison kind of set the stage for African American literature. She's not the first author, but it was Miss Morrison who kind of wasn't afraid to stand out and just write from her heart and write from her African American perspective as a young Black girl. She wrote the type of books that she wanted to read, and we were not in any of them. So she decided that, I cannot find any books to read that I would like to read. And so she took it upon herself to start writing the books that she wanted to read that represented Black people and our struggle in the African American struggle. And so that's what made her stand out as one of the pioneers in African American literature. So I dedicate this show to her because she's one of my favorite authors. She her books are not easy to read, and but if you get a chance, please pick up a book by Toni Morrison and at least attempt to read it. If you can't attempt to read it, if you don't have the time, then try Audible, because that's what I do when I don't have time to read. I get on Audible and I find a good book and I just listen while I'm working or working out or just doing things around the house. When I don't have time to sit down hours to read a book, I listen. So she writes great stories, great African American author. And so I dedicate this episode to her as well as my mother. Now, on the last episode of Stirring the Gumbo Pot, I went in a little bit I explained a little bit about why I decided to call or name my podcast Stirring the Gumbo Pot. And so I just want to revisit that conversation a little bit and talk about just gumbo a little bit more. I don't know if I went into the history. I don't think I went into the history of gumbo, and I'm not going to go delve too deep, but I'm going to touch upon it a little bit more and tell you more about the gumbo. The origins of Louisiana gumbo can be traced back to West Africa during a time when enslaved Africans brought okra gumbo, or gombo as it is known in regional tongues, with them to the Caribbean and the U.S., including where I'm from, the port of New Orleans. In Louisiana, we claim gumbo as a symbol of what makes us different from every other state in the U.S. But the thing about it, it is particularly from West African. And that was taken from writer Jody Ray from the BBC.com. So that was a quote, or rather an excerpt from an article written by a New Orleans native, Jody Ray, on BBC.com. Now, in New Orleans, cooking gumbo is a ritual, and I grew up eating gumbo. I assumed everybody in the world ate gumbo. It was just natural. Some people eat chicken soup. We ate gumbo, and my mom made a wonderful gumbo. Gumbo is made traditionally in the colder months, but you can get it year round. It's a big deal in kitchens throughout the city of New Orleans. I mean, if you're from New Orleans and you're raised in New Orleans, or even Louisiana for that matter, it doesn't have to be specific to New Orleans, but we would break out the pots. Everybody have their favorite gumbo pot, and they're rather large, and it's a big, large stew pot. And we take pride in our gumbos here, and we cheeky about it, which means particular. If you don't know what the word cheeky means, it's a Louisiana, New Orleans term. Cheeky meaning we're particular about something, or when you say cheeky, when somebody has a lot of nerve. Well, she's cheeky. She's got a lot of nerve. So we're cheeky about our gumbo, and we like to tell people what's supposed to be in gumbo. We don't cook gumbo like some people cook in other states and countries. They're putting all kinds of things in gumbos these days. I see them on social media, and it's hilarious. The ingredients that they put in their gumbos and want to call it gumbo, my dear. That is not gumbo. You want a real good, delicious bowl of gumbo? Take a trip to Louisiana, New Orleans in particular. My mother's gumbo. My mom cooked gumbo mostly on holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and Mardi Gras. We had a house full every Mardi Gras. Growing up in New Orleans, we had a house full of people at our house. I grew up in the projects in New Orleans, and my mom would make gumbo was one of the staple menu items that she had ready for you if you visited her house on Mardi Gras. You can't. Oh, the gumbo was so delicious. She used blue crab and shrimp and hot sausage and pieces of ham and just delicious. She would put okra and filet in it. And I'm telling you, my mother, and if you ask anybody from New Orleans who makes the best pot of gumbo, they're going to tell you either their mama or their grandmother makes the best pot of gumbo because, you grow up eating your mother's own version of it, and no one can top it. No one can top your mama's gumbo. Okay? So I just wanted to put that out there how good and delicious my mama's gumbo is and was until the day she left this earth. My mother could cook the best gumbo I've ever eaten in my life. Not at a restaurant, my mother. Okay, so a little bit more about me. So, based on the fact that my show is called Stirring the Gumbo Pot, and I believe I explained in episode one that it was just like a hodgepodge of different topics that I am going to be discussing in no particular order. I am going to live up to that. And so each episode is going to be a variety of different topics and subjects. So until I guess I find my niche, if I ever find my niche, I probably won't because I like a variety of things because, of course, variety is the spice of life. And so, I like different subjects and different topics. And so because right now I'm a solo podcast, it's kind of difficult for me anyway to discuss one topic for for a long conversation. I just can't do that. So it's going to be a variety of different things until I get a better sense of one particular topic or a different format for the show. So I want to talk a little bit more about me. So I'm going to just go down a list of things about myself that may be of interest to you or may spark up conversations later on, and you could elaborate on it in your own little conversations with friends or not. But here I go. The first one. I was born on the heels of the civil rights movement in 1967. So I am a child of the 1970s. I was born in 1967, which makes me 55 years old. I'm going to be 56 this year. And wow. What a long life. Given that a lot of us, don't get to make it this far. But born's on the heels of the civil rights movement. So I was born in July. By the time April rolled around, April 4th, 1968 to be exact, Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated. And I think I was about 9 months old, something like that. I was a baby. And so that's why I say I was born on the heels of the civil rights movement because going back and looking at and researching a little bit about our African American history in this country, the civil rights movement kind of like died away with Dr. King. And so a lot of the movements and marching and things of that nature kind of slowed down and ceased. And then we roll right into the Black Power movement, the Black Power era, rather, in the 70s. So, yeah, I was raised in public housing in the projects in New Orleans. I was born and raised, well, not born there, but I was raised. That's all I knew. So sometimes I might slip and say born and raised because that's the only thing I remember is growing up in New Orleans. I don't remember anything else except being in that project, being in New Orleans in the Treme neighborhood. And I know a lot of you have heard about the Treme neighborhood from the HBO TV show Treme, which followed the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina in 2005. So that's the neighborhood that I grew up in. Another thing about myself is I love my ancestors. I am one of those people who I just love old things. I think, I don't know if you want to call me a Renaissance kind of girl, but I love old stuff. I just, love our history. I love old music. I love, things of the past. And it just makes me happy. Um, to be able to have that memory and of my ancestors and my grandparents and my great grandparents, and I often visit them when I visit in my family hometown of Clinton, Louisiana, which is in East Feliciana Parish in Louisiana. And we have a family cemetery where my mother is buried, and her mother's mother. And whenever I go there, the first thing you come up to as you're approaching our home, it sits up on an incline. It sits up on a little hill, not a very big hill, but somewhat of a slope. Um, the first thing you come to is the cemetery on the left, and there's about there's about 30 people in there. 30 of my family members and ancestors are buried in that graveyard. And I love going in there and I love talking to them, and I will stop and I will go down each row, and I will sometimes I have conversations with them and talk about my memories of them. And then I'll look at their dates, and then I'll go back in my head and I think, wow, I think one of the oldest dates in our cemetery is I want to say 1885, maybe somewhere like that, is when is the earliest date of birth for one of my ancestors, and I want to say that was my great grandmother, who was born in the late 1800s. Um, I love old music. Um, I do. I love music from the 1950s. I love um, jazz singers from back in that era. I just do. I'm just so drawn because it was so real. Music was real back then. It was made from scratch, from real instruments and real vocalists, and not this made up gimmick stuff that they're marketing today as music. And so I just love some days to just put the speakers on in the house and just listen to music from back in the day, from people like Nancy Wilson and Lena Horne and various different artists who, I can't really come off the top of my head with them. That's a few. That's the name, a couple of them. But I love old classic um, black music. Um, I love learning about the history of my people. I think it's important for all of us to find some way to become educated about our past and our struggle, and not just the slave part, but that's important, but our accomplishments, and just us as people. And so you can learn about your tradition and different rituals and the struggle. I think it's important for us to know that stuff, because we can hold on to that, and that'll help us to at least have some kind of hope, or set us on a path to do and accomplish more on our journey to the future, to want more and better for ourselves and for our children. Um, I love the civil rights era. I think I mentioned that. I love that, and I respect the our ancestors who fought for our freedom. I mean, how could you not have respect and pay homage to that? How could you not? Right? Um, I love everything about it. I do. I love Dr. King. I love his struggle. I love them marching. I love the courage that they embodied. I love them, just standing up and not backing down. And they were just paving a way for us, and you have to respect that. You just have to. And I think if more people did respect that, and just acknowledge it, and just try to learn more, I think we as black people, especially our young people today, because they're in a lot of trouble. I think if they would go back and learn about the struggle of our people from the civil rights era, that maybe, they would have second thoughts about some of the things that they're doing out here in these streets today. I love the Harlem Renaissance era, and that's in the 1920s up in Harlem, New York. And there's a lot of artists, the Harlem Renaissance era, and I'm gonna have a whole show. I'm gonna do an entire show on the Harlem Renaissance. And if you're not heard of the Harlem Renaissance, it was a era and a period between the 1920s and maybe the 1930s or somewhere in between there, where black artists moved or migrated rather to New York. And there were jazz artists, vocalists, poets, writers. They all migrated in New York. And it became, and the Harlem, they were in Harlem, obviously. And it became like this group of just artists, of African American artists who were just like so successful and so talented during that era. So I'm gonna dedicate an entire show to artists of the Harlem Renaissance coming up soon. Another thing about me, I get emotional when I look at old photos. I do. I don't know about anybody else, but even photos from my own past, not just other people, but when I'm looking back on old photos of family members who've gone on, or pictures of my children who, when they were younger, it reminds me of times when I wasn't in a good place, or I can look back and say, oh, I've come so far. Back then, I was struggling so bad. I was going through this or going through that. Or I'll look at my kids and say, wow, look at them now compared to then. And it just brings back all these emotions for me. And so I get really emotional about it. And sometimes I might shed a tear. Another thing about me, I absolutely love the 1970s and the Black Power movement. And well, I love Malcolm X. I love the Black Panthers. I love Black Power. I love that era. I think if I had to choose another era, if I had to choose another era of, I would of course want to come back black. That's a thing on social media now. Is what would you like to be if you could be anything else? If besides being black, what else would what other race would you choose to be? And I thought about that, and I gave it a real good thought, and I'm like, how could I even consider being anything else but black? Because it's so beautiful, all of it, the struggle, our accomplishments, and our pride. Man, we're just amazing people. We're so resilient, so beautiful. We have our struggles, but for the most part, we're the most unique, I believe, the most unique race in the world. And so the Black Power movement just does something for me. I would choose to go back to the 70s, the late 60s, early 70s, in that Black Power movement era, because I believe I'm a fighter. I believe I would have been a Black Panther. I'm sure I would have, to fight for our people and to stand up for what's right. You know, so I do think I'm a Black Panther, so to speak. Um, I love Black people, especially the women, because we are phenomenal. We are. Just look at us. Look. All you gotta do is look. I don't have to say anything else. Black women are phenomenal. And so I love my Black people, especially the Black women. Okay. There's a lot of other things about me. Those are just a few things that I wanted to highlight for my episode 2. And I'm okay. Next, what I owe my ancestors. The importance of paying homage to the ancestors, and I think I touched on that a little bit earlier. I think it's important because we we as a people, we still have so much to accomplish. We have so far to go in this struggle of Black life here in America. And so I don't think it's even a struggle to get Black curriculum in schools and universities. They're banning books by Black authors for various different stupid reasons. And so it's important, I think, for us to try to at least find something or someone, or just to go back and pay respect to and look at their life and look at the struggles that they've made, and the just the just the fight that they had to fight, and the all of it, you know. So it's important. That's very important, to pay homage to something, I think, from your past, because without it, I think we still struggle. I think we're still missing something, in order to be able to move forward, you know. So that's the importance, I think, of it. It's important to learn from our past and share it with our children, because if you don't, it gets lost, right? You can't lose the traditions. You can't not teach or not learn yourself some of our history and some of our you have to know those things. I don't know how I would get through life not knowing the sacrifices that our people made, and what they fought for, and our struggle. I don't know how I could move forward without knowing those things. So I think it's important for us to pay homage to that. I feel like I owe my ancestors my success, especially like my grandmother and grandfather, my mother's parents. I owe, especially my grandfather. I learned work ethic from my grandfather. My grandfather left the family with 40 acres and 2 mules. The old cliche, 40 acres and a mule, our reparations, what is due to us. My grandfather, we owned as a family 40 acres of land in East Feliciana Parish, Louisiana. And my grandfather had 2 mules, Cora and Dora. And he would work, he was a sharecropper. And he was mostly solo. He did a lot of that work himself with a plow and 2 mules. And my siblings and I would go, and every summer vacation, when school was out, every summer my mom packed us up and sent her 5 kids to the country with my granddaddy and my grandmother, and we worked in those fields, honey. And so in doing so, built up a strong work ethic, right? So I'm not afraid of work. I'm not. But my grandfather instilled that in us, and I saw him sweat, and I saw him working hard to get those crops up, planted and up by fall. So, he could make a living and leave us with the land that he left us. So I owe my grandmother and my grandfather my success. I owe them for their struggle. So those are just some of the things I wanted to talk about in my second episode. I would like to leave you all today with a poem by Jericho Brown. Okay, here's a poem by Jericho Brown. Jericho Brown is an American poet and writer born and raised in Shreveport, Louisiana. He currently, he's a Pulitzer Prize winning poet, and he won the Pulitzer Prize in poetry for his book, The Tradition. And he's currently the director for the creative writing department at Emory University in Atlanta. And I'd like to end my episode today by reading a poem, because I love poetry. I do. And I love reading some poetry. So I'm going to read Mr. Jericho Brown, who's an African-American gentleman who is from Louisiana, from Shreveport. And so here goes. This is from the book The Tradition, for which he won the Pulitzer Prize in poetry for. The water lilies. They open in the day and close at night. They're good at appearances. They are white. I judge them, judge the study they make of themselves, aspirational beings, fake if you ask me. If you ask me, I'll say no, thank you. I don't need to watch what goes only imagining itself seen. Don't need to see them yawn their thin mouths and feed. On light, absolute, and unmoved, they remind me of black people who see the movie about slaves and exit saying how they would have fought to whip Legree with his own whip and walked away from the plantation, their eyes raised to the sun without going blind. The end.